Hello everyone, and welcome back to Complete and Total Random. Today, we're going to be going over cover and concealment in War Thunder, and how and when to use them. So, to start off with, we'll go with something very basic, and that's bushes. This is your first type of concealment. These are a paid-for item you can get in-game as a decoration. These can be used to cover up your vehicle, breaking up its silhouette, and making it harder to recognize. This is a lot easier to do on smaller vehicles and the such. The only concern when using these to conceal your vehicle is that if they cover up your gunner sights, you won't be able to see. Doing such things will allow you to basically cover up your tank. If you guys want me to do a video on the more in-depth of how to actually cover up your tank properly in War Thunder, this isn't really good how I have it right now. I just kind of like how it looks. I can do a video on that if you guys are interested. But for now, I'm just going to kind of go over to more of the stuff that you can apply to yourself when in game. Okay, now that we're in the test drive, I'm going to demonstrate concealment to you guys. Now, there's two different things. There's concealment and cover. Cover stops incoming projectiles and stuff from hitting you, whereas concealment just stops things from seeing you. Usually, cover is concealment. The one exception would be things that they can't shoot through, but they can still see you. But you don't really have any examples of this in War Thunder that I can think of while doing this video. So things that would count as concealment could be things like these types of buildings and stuff, these destructible buildings. They can be shot through, as I will now demonstrate. So they can be shot through, but if you're sitting behind them and covering up your vehicle, so make sure anytime you're covering up your vehicle that they can't see you from around the corners and stuff. So if you have little bits of your tank poking out like that, they'll know you're there. Especially when you're using concealment, you gotta make sure they don't know your tank is there, because if they know your tank is there, they're just going to shoot you. One of the main things that I see people doing wrong with concealment is they'll get hit and they'll pop smoke. They'll be tracked, or their driver will be killed and they'll pop smoke. Now, the enemy tank is already going to be looking at where you are. So even though there's smoke here, I can still shoot. I already know that tank is there, so I can just keep shooting and keep my mouse in the same spot. And I will eventually hit the guy enough to kill them. So this can be a very big issue if you pop smoke. It also makes it so your team can't see, and it draws a giant cloud. Here, let me just drive through it. It does draw a giant cloud that basically points at your position. So if you ever see smoke, you know that there's a player usually in that area. A better use of smoke that I don't see people using as common is to get across things like large boundaries and stuff. So if you deploy smoke over yourself and then continuously deploy smoke as you move to make it harder for the enemy to figure out where you are and make it so their shots are more likely to miss. Now, there is something interesting about using smoke that you need to know, but only for top tier. So normal smoke grenades can't be seen through, as you can see. I cannot see through this with my thermals, but there is another type of smoke, and that is ESS, engine smoke system. These, as you can see, even though I'm in a smoke cloud, I can see straight through it. So sometimes you got to be careful, because if you're using something like ESS against tanks with thermals, they might be able to see you anyway. But let's say I did that, I can just look through this, and if they don't realize that it's ESS, I can use it as concealment while being able to view out of it, and they cannot see me. Now, as you can see, it doesn't last forever, but it is very useful for being able to see through and giving yourself kind of a bit of concealment. If they know what they're doing and they just check with thermals, because usually that's a good tactic, is if you see smoke, check with thermals, make sure it's not ESS, and don't discount it out, because there is at least a handful of players that know how to do that. Now, Other than that, for the most part, there's not really much else to use concealment for. It's should only be used usually to just cover your movements and other things. To try and cover your current position is usually a bad idea, especially if you've just been injured, because you can't fight back the second you get your gun online. It also means that it points a giant arrow to your position. The other types of kind of cover are things like bushes and trees and other things. Anytime you're moving in tree lines and stuff, just to kind of keep yourself a little bit safer, it's always good to try and keep yourself in the shadows of trees and stuff. Use it to conceal your movement, because if the enemy can't see me as well because I'm behind bushes, they're less likely to notice me. You can also use it to hide yourself, but it's not recommended. Usually you want to use it along with cover, as you can kind of see here, and we'll get into in more detail later. But other than that, I'd say that's the basics for concealment. If you guys have any other questions or stuff, or concerns, let me know in the comments below. Now let's move on to cover. Now, welcome back, guys. Now we're in a custom battle, just so I can kind of demonstrate the basics of cover. So there's multiple different ways of using cover. So there's the basics of things like hull down positions. So as you can see, I can come up to something like these logs. Never mind. I broke the logs, which means that the logs aren't good cover because they can be shot through. But what I can show you is if I come over to this rock. Ugh, that was a bit of a blooper almost. I don't know if I caught it though. If I come up to things like this rock, you can see how my gun is just barely pointing over the top of it. So I can fire over it, but the majority of my tank is concealed. Now this is both concealment and cover, at least from the front. So from the sides, it's not giving me any protection. But if there's an enemy in front of me, using things like rocks like this can give me a lot of cover and help me press the attack. Other things you can do is if you know an enemy's going to be pushing around corners and stuff, you can sit like this using the rock as cover, and if they push you, you can fire straight into the side of them, basically forcing them to negate their armor to push you. The other things you can do is sometimes in certain maps you'll have above head cover. Things like bridges and stuff are great examples of this. This can both be used as concealment from things like airplanes and the like, as well as cover from things like artillery. So if you're getting artillery on your position, sometimes you can hide underneath bridges. It can also help you against bombs, but skilled players can sneak bombs under bridges. It's difficult, but basically they just need to like launch it so it arcs its way under. But if it ends up landing on top, it'll end up basically catching it and stopping you from being destroyed. There's a lot of times where you can use both cover and concealment. So things like over here, you can see how I can look out of this, but like look at how much little of my tank is exposed. Just my turret, and I'm looking through this tiny gap, making it really hard to see me, but it's okay to see out of. And then using things like thermals can make it easier, as you can see. Now these allow me to limit the basically size of the target they can hit, and if I'm smart about it, usually I can make it so only my best armor is actually being shot at. So especially things that are covering the sides of my tank, hull down positions and the like. And what hull down position means is essentially anytime you are using the cover to conceal your hull, because obviously you don't need that part of your tank to fire at the enemy. Other things you can use is like if you're fighting inside of buildings and around buildings and stuff, you can conceal part of your tank inside of buildings. So like you can use cover like this, allowing you to ambush. This is also concealment. You can see how the second I see a tank, I can shoot it, and it makes it harder for them to have time to react, because I am both hard to shoot because they're only going to be able to see a sliver of me because I'm using the buildings, and only my best armor can be hit. Whereas if I'm sitting out in the open, they can kind of just pepper me with shells because I'm a much bigger target. Other than that, there's not much else to note about cover and concealment, other to just make sure that you're not, if you are trying to use something to protect yourself, that you're not getting shot, like it's not getting shot through, that it's not actually concealment when you think it's cover. But it's always important to keep your best armor towards enemies, because otherwise they can go through your engines and other things. So like, let's say I knew enemies were going to be coming through. Wow, the AI is not doing very smart. If I knew enemies were coming through one way, but I don't want to get flanked, I can like put my body into a specific position using both cover and concealment to hide myself and ambush enemy tanks, especially when defending points. This can be very useful. No, don't shoot at me. I'm in the middle of doing a video. But as you can see, that can, as you may guess, that makes it a lot easier for you to survive getting shot at and stuff. Another thing you can do is, if you are in the middle of a hull down position and you fire, it's always good to move to a different position before you fire again. Because essentially, if you fire and miss and the target knows that you're there, they're just going to start shooting at you. So like, if I was over here per se, you can see all of this stuff can be used for hull down. It's a nice slope here. As long as I have a gun with a good enough gun depression, I can always peek myself out in one position, fire, but I don't want to use that same position again, necessarily. Sometimes I'll want to move a little bit, try and make sure my antennas aren't being noticed, put myself back out. There's that guy. Fire again, and then pull back down. And then you can see how like you can just poke yourself back up. Sometimes it's better to just peek up, like wait with your binoculars and other things, like this, so you're completely covered. They can't do anything about you, and then you can just jump out, fire, move yourself back into cover, kind of like, come on. Now, obviously, this is a little bit too much of a slope to kind of demonstrate that on, but it's always a good thing to do is use your cover as much as you can. If you can conceal your entire tank while still being able to observe the enemies, it can be very helpful in knowing when to push, when to attack. So you can always wait for the enemies to be looking in different directions from you before you peek up. Always make sure, if you are peeking up from concealed positions, that you are trying your best not to arouse attention to yourself. Try not to use smoke, fire too much from the same position. Try not to use your machine guns, because tracers work both ways. So if somebody's firing at you, they know that they can fire back. And you know if there's tracers flying at you, well, that's basically drawing a line towards yourself or towards the person who's firing at you. And with all these tricks and tips, hopefully that gives you guys a little bit better of a understanding of how to use cover and concealment in War Thunder. I know this one dragged on a little bit longer than it probably should have, but if you did enjoy the video, leave a like, leave a comment, and all that shebang. See you guys in the next one.